So from some of the questions that we got, we're addressing some of the concerns that is in the foremost in the heads of 20, 30-year-olds, the developing minds. And we wonder, what are the effects of technology in these young generation who may have born into or have always been immersed in this world of technology?
That's a very important, relevant question, because I'll talk a bit about the mental health effects of what technology, understanding that the technology has increased exponentially since I was a child. In fact, my iPhone 13 I now own has more computing power than the computers that took us to the moon. So to put that in perspective, a lot has changed, and it has changed very quickly, just doubling literally overnight. So now we have an internet, a very robust internet, a very stable internet, which wasn't always true, at least if you started with America Online like a few of us did. So there's been a tremendous amount of change. So let me talk a little bit about the positive before I go into some of my concerns as a mental health professional. And some of the positive is the availability of information and resources right at the tip of my fingers. I could take my 13, as long as I have juice, I could go anywhere I need to or want to across the world. Now that's truly astounding. I can Google things, and I do. I sometimes ask Siri to name this tune that I can't think of, it's playing on the radio. I mean, that's just truly incredible that we have that ability to have instantaneous knowledge and information right there at our fingertips. There's really very little I do on my office on my computer that I can't do on my phone. So that's very powerful and very revolutionary. I'm sure my grandparents would just, if they were still living, they would go, what in the world? It's probably of the devil or something. I don't know. They'd probably freak them out pretty good. So that's the good news, and it is a resource. It reminds me of fire. Fire can cook my dinner or burn my house to the ground. It's how you use it and what you use it for that makes the difference. Now, on to some of the concerns. I think the negative part of it is it takes us away from the face-to-face interactions. We become a culture of cyber relationships where we don't literally lay eyes on people, and yet we have relationships with them. We have online friends, we have online gaming friends, we have Instagram followers, we have people that we will never see in life that are our closest friends. And when you think about that, that's a huge, huge shift from real life relationships where I can shake someone's hand or I can give them a hug. I can't do that. And emoticons just don't cut it. So I'm concerned about just the detachment from a real life relationship, a human to human relationship, and that these are taking the place of that and leaving a big gap. The other piece of that is too, there's anonymity out there on the internet, as I think we all are aware of. You can be anybody you want to be. You can take on the avatar of whatever you choose to be, even if it has nothing to do with who you really are. So there's also a movement away from the real self, from the authentic self, from who I really am. I can be whoever I want to be, my alter ego, and play that game and have no accountability for it. And sometimes that can turn kind of malicious, because we've all heard about what happens when people start talking trash on the internet and posting pictures and being really inappropriate about that, or being mean and vicious on Twitter. I mean, we've all are watching it happen, and the accountability is almost minimal. I mean, they can kick you off of Facebook, but you can go somewhere else. So we have this anonymity that protects people from having to be accountable for the kind of things they say and the way they treat others. Whereas they wouldn't say things to your face that they'll say to you online. So it's a great place to hide. It's a great place to pretend to be somebody else that you're not, and then have a fantasy world, live in a fantasy world. And I've treated a couple teenagers that their primary identity was online, and they put out pictures that weren't even them and said, here's who I am. And of course, that wasn't the truth. So it just creates a lot of disconnect, which is worrisome. It can quickly become obsessive. It can quickly become very damaging to mental health, increase isolation. When their parents want to regulate their time online, they get angry and belligerent and very difficult to deal with, because they don't have any balance. That becomes their life. So again, there's nothing wrong with online gaming. There's nothing wrong with being on the internet, but where's the balance? Where's the balance? You need to balance your life. Get outside. The world out there is real. I will never forget, as long as I live, what Kevin said, my middle son, probably when he was like 11. We were actually in a canoe paddling down the Potomac River in Maryland. And he looked out this beautiful scene to our right and he says, "Dad, that looks so digital."
Wow.
And I go, "Are you serious? Digital? That's real. That's not digital. It's not a picture." I haven't forgotten that. He and I laugh about that. But it was also an indication of his view of the world. I'm taking it in as beauty that I could touch and feel and walk in. And for him, it was digital. So that's kind of telling, I think. So as a mental health professional, I'm concerned about the isolation and disconnection with reality that comes with the internet.
Which could lead to psychosis. Psychosis is breaking from reality, and some of the kids really almost act like they're living in this altered reality, and that's their life, and this life is not real or relevant. Also with my teens, serious bullying happens because of social media, and I just keep telling them, you've got to take breaks from it, and you got to be so careful what you post. Because they'll post something, and then they'll come to school, and there'll be 12 kids who taunt them about, they misconstrue the post, or there's a lot of bullying. And also the swiping function, when you swipe, then the logarithms, or whatever they're called, send you more of the same. And so I'm seeing a lot of superstitious or magical thinking, a lot of obsessing, a lot of fear. It's not good. You know, if I could, I'd take away the swiping function, because it just feeds these kids more of the same, and it feels like it leads them down a path too. It feels very leading.
Well, and you add the natural curiosity of preteens and teens. They want to see what's going on. And I'm afraid there's a lot of bad characters out there and nefarious people who take advantage of that curiosity and take them places they should never go.
Right.
So one of the things that I end up finding myself doing is helping the parents, educating the parents as to what they need to know. And I'm hardly an internet expert, but I know enough to help the parents make sure that what's going on in their child is safe. Because what I found is the kids will lie to their parents and fool their parents and say things that just aren't true. So I try to enlighten them. I encourage them to police and regulate how much time is spent on the internet, where they go. There's great software programs that will track where their children go. And I've told them, you cannot afford to not be watching this. And that's when the predator shows up to talk to your 13-year-old daughter.
Right.
And this is serious, and you've got to be responsible. And you can't just say, "Well, I don't understand about that stuff. It's okay, he's just watching cartoons." Is he really? Do you know that?
Right.
So I try to sound the warning on that and educate as much as I can, and to put structure in there. And then I'll have the child in, and he'll say stuff, and I'll go, "No, that's not really how it is." So we get some truth going, some reality there to help the parents regulate the internet.
So definitely what I'm hearing is there's a direct correlation to mental health with young in terms of how much they're spending time on social media, internet, digital devices, and technology. Now, I know probably our audience who's maybe a little beyond the age of under parental supervision, it's almost up to their discretion and their self-control to regulate or manage their own sanity, or even restrict or limit their time of use. What would you say to some of the young adults? What is a healthy way to balance between technology?
I think they're pretty good at that. I think somewhere around 11th, 12th grade, there's a shift, and then there's another significant shift at age 25 in terms of exercising good judgment. So I think the older ones are better able to reap the benefits and avoid the risks, unless they're so damaged. But I just think middle schoolers shouldn't have social media.
Amen.
I mean, unless they never recovered from that kind of middle school, early high school period.
Yeah. And I think for young adults too, one of the places that could be a particular issue is on dating sites. And there's just lots of dating sites. It's very common and typical, and not necessarily a bad or wrong way to meet somebody, because it does have its benefits. But again, you've got to be careful. You can't believe everything you see and everything you read. I think by the time they become adults, they have heard the stories. Maybe they learned from a friend's experience, and hopefully a word of the wise is sufficient, so they're careful about what they do on the internet.
Well, yet young adults, I mean, they want to stay connected to the world events.
Yeah.
I think the Generation Zs and the Millennials have this very big passion and for what's going on in the world. So they want to stay connected. Yet there is anxiety tuning into these things on a daily basis. So how do they feel relevant to feel like they're part of it, that they're not totally disconnecting themselves from world events, yet to manage their own mental health through all this?
Yeah, I think young adults, because the world is so at our fingertips, and we literally get downloads from Ukraine of the carnage and craziness going on there instantly, that they've got to ration out how much of that they choose to look at. Because it's upsetting. It's upsetting to anybody, but I think when you really want to be helpful and you see what's going on in your world and it's in your face, you've got to decide how much of that should I take in. And I think we need to regulate ourselves. The other thing I'd say to young adults who are passionate for about so much, which is their strength, is find a way to help somebody locally that you'd like to do long distance. In other words, do for one what you'd like to do for all. There's a lot of good local causes. I know we're not Ukraine, thank God that hasn't come here, but there's still a lot of need, a lot of things they can do, pro-social things, donate their time, volunteer, actually give money to good causes. I know I'm a member of Samaritan's Purse Network, and so I get commercials, I guess infomercials from what's going on in there, and it prompts me to donate some money. I mean, it's not a lot, but I know that if I and a whole bunch of other people, they're going to get that need met because they're already over there doing it. So I can do that. I have a long arm through that organization to help a needing part of the country, or the world rather. So I would suggest to get involved and do something pro-social in your community, make that a way of life, meet some new people and create some community. It's a wonderful way to do that.
The young adult generation nowadays are very spiritual. They all seem to believe in God or some sort of God or some facet or type of God that they choose. As a therapist, how can you help maybe incorporate spirituality into people's lives that's helpful, but not maybe specific to one type of religion or orientation of belief?
Right. Mostly as a therapist, we explore things with them, and we explore without judgment, and we ask them, or we would encourage them, we wouldn't ask them, to explore with integrity. Like, go out there and do your research.
And I can think of some times when it's brought some conflict between the parents who would bring a child in who come from a conservative Christian background who want us to fix their child who has decided they're not a Christian anymore and they don't want to go to church. And then we can feel the pressure to straighten them out because mom and dad haven't been able to do that. So that becomes kind of tricky, and every situation is a little different, but we have to kind of walk that line between affirming the truth of what we believe personally with understanding their child needs the opportunity to explore and come to a place where they own their faith. And they need space to do that. And then we talk to parents about what scares you about that. What really is scary about letting them do that or even helping them do that. And that often kind of looks at some of the insecurities the parents have about allowing their children to explore their faith and then come to an ownership of it.
So you would suggest that you're okay for them to help, like, explore that with their child in a way, or allow them to explore their own spirituality?
I would say encourage them to explore it with integrity. Like when I say explore it, do research and do real research. Don't just decide that sounds good, so that's true. Challenge it. Challenge all of it.
And there's also a bit of a counter challenge to the child who wants to totally reject everything their parents have told them and reject the church and their faith. I do caution them to say, just be careful that you don't just reject it because you're rejecting your parents and the way that they treat you or trying to force you to go to church or whatever. You need to put it on the same level as other religion types or organizations that you're discovering, and without rejecting it just because mom and dad have been hard-headed and heavy-handed with it.
Be open.
Do you think the church is doing a pretty good job about addressing the mental health and needs with all the diversity that exists in all these?
A few churches. Which I would say the majority probably are not. And I would say go find those healthier churches. I think there's nothing worse than a toxic church. Not going to church would be better than going to a toxic church, So toxic churches, people it's a big issue. In fact, we really ought to have support groups for survivors.
When I have someone who's been damaged by church or toxic faith, actually there's a really good book out there named Toxic Faith, which would be worth a read. I empathize with them, and I do that genuinely too, because I've experienced a lot of hurtful stuff in the church, things done in the name of God that had nothing to do with Him. I'm very fond of don't ever confuse God with His people, because I think that's a big mistake and will lead you to a lot of disappointment, disillusion, and cynicism. I think she and I have come from a similar background in the sense we've worked through some of the things that have been hurtful to us. And we're always ready to help someone else just move on from where they're at and do it with integrity.
And accepting them where they're at. They may not even be at that place of, they may need to explore all the religions. Do it. Just do it with integrity. And I keep coming back to just talk to God. But I know it sounds so simple.
So, and final thoughts, obviously, this world of a lot of mental anguish, from relationships to those very close to you, to the whole world chaos that we read about and hear about. I think we're more than ever needing the sense of community that we can trust and building that. What are your thoughts or suggestions on how to build a community you can trust? And what's your own part in it, as well as what kind of community can you find or build?
It's something we've talked about before, about the importance of intentionality, of creating community by intentionally taking risks, connecting with people, putting yourself in a place where you can meet diverse groups of folks, follow a particular passion. I know there's a bicycling group in my city where it just attracts all kinds of folks. And they have that community within that group, or others like to go canoeing or camping or mountain bike riding, and some are walkers. We have a group of walkers, and they walk together. But while they're walking, they have community, and they hear each other, they're in each other's lives. So I think it's taking the risk to create the community you need, and then being wise if it's not working or you're not making the connections you want to, move on from that. But if you share a passion, that's an automatic way to connect with somebody, no matter who they are or where they come from or if they even look like you.
It can be a community of 2 or 3. You just reach out to like-minded people you feel comfortable with, and you start it.
I think it's helpful to say to young folks, you really need to take personal responsibility for creating community. It's not going to come to you. It's out there. It's available. You have to do some work. You have to put yourself out there, take some risks. And for some people, that's hard to do. That's hard to say, hey, you want to have coffee? Right. But without that, you stay stuck and isolated.
Great. Any final thoughts?
Thank you for having us here. This has really been enjoyable for me. It's not often that either of us really have a chance to just talk about stuff without it being somebody I'm working with professionally or even a colleague. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope everyone who is viewing this will just think through what we've said and take it for what it's worth and think it through.
Examine it, question it, be open and honest with yourself, just make use of it. But yes, thank you for this opportunity.
I think the key word that we kept hearing was awareness, right?
Right.
Self-awareness.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and it starts with self,
Right.
right? So
Right.
thank you. Thank
You're
you for your
welcome.
valuable insights.